G'day guys and gal. For supposed invincible immortal demigods, the Primarchs sure do die a lot. Yes, not all of these deaths stick, but many of them do. Whether it be going out in a blaze of glory or enduring quite a sad unremarked death, the Primarchs are at the end of the day just really spicy humans that need a few more newtons of force to kill. Regardless of how they die, each Primarch death was a big deal that forever altered the course of Warhammer 40k, so I think it's worth deep diving into each of their deaths, discussing how it happened, who killed them, and what the immediate impact of their death was. I will not be counting demon Primarch banishments. Before we get started, the sale of the Fallen Angel of Blood has ended, and what a sale it was. You guys were absolute legends. It was our single biggest major mini launch ever. If you see that items are still available for sale, that's just the last couple dozen models we've produced. By the end of the weekend, everything will be sold out. So if you're lucky and check before then, there may still be time to pick one up. As another epic note, we sold out of nearly every pre-painted major mini from the special launch, with only a handful remaining, such as some kittens, flaming dragons, Ras, and even collectors of infinity. These are pro-painted models for between $50 to $100, which includes the model itself. Massive steal. We also did instantly sell out of our custom pre-painted service relaunch. However, we are opening another batch of slots for that, so if you missed out, you can now pick your own major mini, pick its paint scheme, its painting standard, and we'll handle the rest, getting you an amazingly painted major mini. Our new service is a huge upgrade over the old one, logistically and quality rise, as we've teamed up with West Coast Studios for this. I do apologize to anyone that had issues with the old pre-painting service. I promise the new service is 1,000 times better. We're starting slow, so only a couple slots to begin with as we scale up, so if you wanted to get a pre-painted mini, then now's your chance. Link to all this is below. Today we'll go over the death of each Primarch who did indeed experience death, including the Primarchs who managed to return from said deaths. Let's get into it. We'll go in order of deaths to make things more coherent, because we need all the coherence we can get when dealing with my degenerate convict accent. The first and one of the most iconics was the death of Ferrus, killed by his slutty best brother Fulgrim during the Isfahan dropsite massacre. Ferrus was genuinely considered one of the greatest Primarch warriors, easily one of the strongest, up there with Vulcan, so it does seem strange that he would lose to Fulgrim in what was more or less a strength contest. However, Ferrus had been surprised multiple times that day. Firstly, he was surprised by his supposed reinforcement legions, opening fire on his warriors, but more importantly, he was surprised by Fulgrim's strength, since Fulgrim was being fed raw power by the layer blade. Ferrus went for a strike that in normal circumstances would have broken Fulgrim's guard and left him open for a fatal blow. However, Fulgrim blocking the strike and matching Ferrus' strength was unexpected, making Ferrus the one exposed to a fatal blow instead. When Fulgrim raised up his sword, he actually refused to finish his brother, but his will was so broken that the demon within the layer blade managed to force him to swing the sword anyway, cutting off Ferrus' head. It's hard to walk off a decapitation, so with a bright flash that often represents a Primarch's death, Ferrus was no more. His death shook everyone, as up until then, Primarchs were thought to be unkillable. It really raised the stakes of the heresy for everyone and drove Fulgrim into insanity. Ferrus was not the only Primarch to die that day. Vulcan tried to charge down Perturabo's gun line, but had a nuke dropped on him instead. After walking that off, the traitor Zerg rushed Vulcan, dogpiling him with knives and swords, cutting the Great Drake down. To the traitor's shock, his body still had life in it, so Horus gave him over to Conrad to figure out how to kill Vulcan. Conrad tried literally everything: decapitation, incineration, freezing, suffocation. He killed Vulcan over and over again. However, Vulcan was a perpetual, making him unkillable. Vulcan managed to regenerate each and every time, with his regeneration actually speeding up the more he was killed. Eventually Vulcan escaped, where he would be killed by Conrad once again on Macragge, and then when he regenerated from that, he was killed by John Grammaticus with the Fulgurite, which was less of a temporary death than usual, but still temporary. Later on, he was then killed by Magnus a shitload of times in the webway, with Magnus even hitting him with a final Kamehameha, a spell literally designed to strip his perpetualness from his DNA and kill him. Naturally, Vulcan walked this off and beat his nerdy-ass brother to banishment. A little while later, Vulcan tackled a gigantic knight-sized orc into a vat of pure wire energy and was atomized. This has to be some kind of record. Vulcan is what happens to a Primarch when you take their plot armor away. They die all the time. And then to negate that, he was given even stronger plot armor. Funny to think that Vulcan died more times than all the other Primarchs combined. This next one is a bit more interesting, as it wasn't exactly a proper death, but I'm still gonna count it because this is my fucking channel and I can do what I want. Angron's death at the hands of the Butcher's Nails. Hear me out. The Butcher's Nails were not compatible with Angron's Primarch brain, insane. Instead of fueling his aggression and giving him pleasure rewards for violence, the nails just shredded his brain and put him in a constant state of agony. His brain was healing slightly slower than the nails were destroying it, thus Angron was slowly dying, with the Emperor even remarking that his son only had a few years left, so he was content to let him fulfill his role before expiring. That death would come during the Scouring of Nysiria, Angron's homeworld. During the peak of the battle, when Angron was fighting Guilliman, and Lorgar was performing a ritual to forcefully ascend Angron to become a demon, Angron began seizuring and hemorrhaging. He finally hit the moment of no return, where his brain was finally defeated by the nails. If Lorgar hadn't turned Angron into a demon right there and then, that seizure would have likely killed Angron or made him brain dead. There's also an argument to make that becoming a demon is also technically a death sentence, but I'll save that for another video. So while Angron did technically live on as a demon, the dude's mortal life had basically ended just as he ascended. This next Primarch death was as wasteful as it was confusing, that being Alpharius's. I'm not going to dive into the motivations of the Alpha Legion or Alpharius here, as that's a headfuck of a video unto itself, so let's stick to the facts. Alpharius invaded the Sol system well before Horus and his legions were to arrive. The invasion was strange, with the damage done being superficial, and more so mocking Rogel than anything else. Alpharius seemingly managed to bait Rogel and most of the Imperial Fists away from the Sol system on a wild goose chase, at which point he then invaded Pluto, with a large chunk of his legion. However, Rogel had anticipated this, springing his own trap and attacking Alpharius directly. The two Primarchs dueled, however Rogel was a master swordsman. Alpharius on the other hand wasn't known as a particularly powerful Primarch, more so better at working from the shadows. Dorn managed to trap Alpharius' strike, then cut his hands off and then brutalize his brother in what I can only describe as a Mortal Kombat fatality. A lot of people say that Dorn only won because Archaemus deflected a fatal strike from Alpharius, which allowed Rogel to get an opening, but a lot of people are stupid fucks that don't know the lore. The lore literally says that Archaemus' attempt to block Alpharius' strike did nothing. It didn't even slow the strike down, it just sent Archaemus flying. The lore also states Rogel was baiting the strike deliberately to give himself an opening to finish the duel fast, i.e. Rogel won fair and square. The result of this was Omegan taking control of the Alpha Legion and withdrawing most of them from the heresy. Rogel Dorn also discovered a lot of holes in the Sol system's defenses, so this was a bit of a loyalist dub. This next one is also a bit on the fence, but I'll still mention it. Jaghattai Khan being killed by Mortarion. During the Siege of Terra, Morty unleashed this plague of despair that was causing thousands of defenders to kill themselves and millions more to more or less give up. Even Rogel wanted to give up. The Khan knew he had to kill Morty to stop it, so he charged his forces right into the Death Guard and confronted his mothy brother. The two fought, Morty seeming to be the greater of them until Jaghattai went turbo mode, fucked Morty up and then cut his head off, suffering a fatal wound in return. Now the reason why I count this as a death despite Jaghattai being taken to safety and eventually restored to life is because there was a flash of light that heralds the Primarch's death, as well as his sons feeling the psychic shockwave of his death. My theory is that he did die, but the Emperor held his soul in his body through sheer will, giving the Loyalists enough time to get him to a Dark Age of Technology healing device. Shit was lit. The immediate impact of this was the Loyalists recapturing of the Lionsgate spaceport, allowing them to drive off the traitor fleet in orbit with its guns. They also broke the Death Guard and ended the Curse of Despair. Overall, a good result. What was less of a great result was Sanguinius getting beaten to death by Horus. Sanguinius was fated to duel his brother and he was fated to die, yet Sanguinius wanted to defy fate. When the two brothers fought, Sanguinius was actually the greater warrior and won the duel, but then Horus activated turbo fuck you Chaos God mode and quickly ended the fight, beating Sanguinius down like a disobedient dog, pulping his organs, crushing his bones, and making a mess of things. He then squeezed Sanguinius until the Great Angel died, before then allowing demons to string up and crucify the Angel's corpse. A pretty undignified end to such a dignified warrior. The immediate impact was that the entire Blood Angel Legion was struck by the Black Rage. All of them, even the noble ones like Raldoron and Azkaellon, were turned into rabid beasts, ripping anything they saw to shreds, terrifying even the traitors who were overwhelmed and torn apart. It also doesn't really specify how, but Sanguinius' sacrifice was essential in the Emperor's victory over Horus, so there's that. Speaking of which, Horus was the next Primarch to die. When the Emperor and Horus fought, it became clear Horus had more raw power. He was infused with the might and focus of all four Chaos Gods. To keep up with him, the Emperor had to be incredibly crafty. See, Horus was raw power, no finesse. The Emperor wasn't as powerful, but had way more finesse. Even at one point in their fight, using Eldar-inspired master swordsmanship techniques, the Emperor managed to trick Horus into temporarily releasing his chaos power, making him vulnerable for the Emperor to shank him with a special knife, killing the War Master of Chaos. The effect was immediate. The Chaos Gods lost their anchor and were banished. The traitor forces began to rout and retreat. The warp storms and power keeping Guilliman from Terra dissipated. The war quite literally ended right there and then. Sometime after the heresy, Conrad Curze would be slain by a Calidus assassin, that being one of the shape-shifting assassins. However, it was more of an assisted suicide than anything else. Conrad had been going more and more insane. The only thing he clung onto was that he couldn't be blamed for his infinite crimes because it was what fate decreed. However, Conrad also foresaw his own death at the hands of this assassin, so he had to either allow it to happen or prevent it and prove that fate was ordained, hence face the fact that he was an evil piece of shit who had the freedom to choose for his entire life. That would have been too much for Conrad to bear, so instead he allowed the Calidus assassin to cut his head off with a Catan phase blade, one of the few weapons capable of cleanly decapitating a Primarch. The immediate effect was a large chunk of the Night Lord Legion scattering into various warbands, as well as some Night Lords hunting down and killing the assassin in revenge. Now for a kill that didn't quite stick, that being Guilliman getting stabbed and killed by Fulgrim. During the scouring, the Loyalists were hunting down the remaining traitor elements. Guilliman came face to face with Fulgrim. Now Guilliman fucking sucks at Primarch dueling. He pretty much loses every time. Fulgrim on the other hand is quite good at it and is also a big ass demon, so he managed to stab Guilliman in the throat with a poison blade. G-Man died, his soul being at the tip of the warp, about to plunge in. However, it appears that the Emperor intervened to stop G-Man's true death, likely similar to with the Khan. Then Guilliman was put into stasis before being brought back to life 10,000 years later in the current setting. The effect of his death wasn't as dramatic as others, as there were other Loyalist Primarchs who could continue leading the Imperium, but I'm sure his sons were pretty depresso expresso about it. And finally, Rogel Dorn's apparent death to a large group of cultists. I know the canon of this event is in doubt, but it's worth mentioning anyway. During one of Chaos's early incursions into the Imperium after the heresy had ended, Rogel faced them head on, getting trapped on board an enemy ship and then getting swarmed to death by cultists, not legionaries, cultists. However, GW doesn't like perma-killing potential moneybags, so now the official story is Dorn being MIA, only his hand getting found. As Dorn was more or less the last Loyalist Primarch to vanish, the effect was that the Imperium, for the first time, would not be led by Primarchs or the Emperor, but by a bunch of humans, who did manage to keep the lights on, but fucked up almost everything else. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then pick up a pre-painted mini, either one of the handful of pre-made ones remaining, or your own custom one, or maybe if you're lucky, a few fallen angels might still be around. Hit the subscribe button and hit the real subscribe button for more Primarch content. Join the Discord for more memes and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.